Hey Yakuter, hope you're doing well, and today we're back with some more Minecraft Dungeons. Well, kinda, because yet again we are doing another tier list, and today I'm ranking every bow enchantment in the game, and I'm going to be putting them on this handy dandy tier list. So let's get started. Alright, the first enchant is Accelerate, and I really like this enchant, especially depending on the bow. And I think I'll show you why I like this enchant because it's actually really fun to see. So here I have the auto crossbow, which has the accelerated fire rate as its unique enchantment, which is basically the accelerate enchantment. And as you can see, it ramps up to 100% and then it just shoots like an absolute mini gun. Like this is insane how fast it shoots. So depending on the bow, this enchantment can be super fun. I definitely recommend pairing it with Infinity because that just makes it way more overpowered. So because it's so fun, I think I'm going to be putting it, I would say it's S tier, but I feel like there's some better enchantments, so I think it's going to go in A tier just because it is really fun, but I don't use it very often. But I mean, it is super fun to use. Also, before we get too far into this video, I just want to say that this video will probably be a little bit longer because I want to explain my reasoning behind different enchantments and whatnot. Also, of course, this tier list is just my opinion, so if I put like your favorite enchantment into a lower tier, don't get super upset about it because these are just the enchantments that I like to use. Okay, next up is the Artifact Charge enchantment. And this one, basically, after you use an artifact, your next attack becomes charged. So normally on most bows, unless they're like a crossbow or like a... Actually, I think on short bows you still have to. You have to pull the bow back until it's fully charged and then you shoot it. That way it does more damage. You can shoot it without... Anyway. So this, if maxed out, will let you do the next 3 shots fully charged, which is actually quite helpful depending on the bow you're using. If you're using crossbow, then obviously this enchantment is useless. And I don't think it even comes on crossbows because that wouldn't make sense. But either way, this one can be quite helpful if you are using artifacts that are like short duration, so like Boots of Swiftness, something that comes back super quick. So I'd say this one is probably B tier. I don't think it's that good because I always use crossbows and stuff like that, so I'm never using like bows that I have to pull back all the way. But I can see how if you do have a bow that you need to pull back to do the max amount of damage, how this enchantment could be quite helpful. Next is the Anima Conduit enchantment, and I would probably say that this is another S tier enchantment. It's the exact same enchantment that you would put on a sword, so based on the mobs that you kill, you get a little bit of health back. And this also lets you gather souls because it gives you +1 soul gathering, so it helps you gather even more souls. And I'd probably say this is a good S tier enchantment because if you do have a bow that can wipe out lots of enemies, then this is a great way to heal yourself because you can put it on your sword, you can put it on your bow, and so no matter what you're using to kill enemies, you're going to be getting some health back. Next is the bonus shot enchantment, and to be honest, I don't really like this enchantment very much at all. It's not, honestly, I would probably say it's F tier, and the reason being is when you shoot a normal shot, it'll shoot a second shot out as well. Except for the second shot, if you have it fully maxed out, does 24% of the first shot, which is like, that's not a lot of damage. And when you can only have 3 enchantment slots per weapon, I'd much rather have an enchantment slot filled in with something else than something that's going to do that low damage. Up next is the Burst String Bow enchantment, and this is actually quite an interesting one that I haven't really used like at all. I think I maybe used it once or twice. But basically it does 40% of the damage of a charged shot of the bow that you're using, and it can shoot up to 3 targets when you roll. So if you roll fully upgraded, it's going to shoot 3 targets, do a pretty good amount of damage. And I think that's quite interesting. It's only going to go into, actually I think it's going to go into C tier because, to be honest, if you don't have armor that lets you roll a lot, this artifact is completely useless. And even then, the max amount of rolls that you can have in an armor is, shoot, I don't remember, like 7 or so. I don't remember. It's not like crazy high, and this also still costs you 1 arrow every time it shoots. So I would rank it higher, but to be honest, I don't think it's that good. Up next is the Chain Reaction enchantment. I think this is another good enchantment to show you how good it can be if you use it right. So here I have my beloved harp crossbow. It's my favorite bow in the game, and it has the Chain Reaction enchantment, which has a chance to shoot 5 arrows in all directions upon impact. And a 30% chance seems pretty low, at least you would think, but it actually activates pretty dang frequently, at least when you're using a bow like this that just shoots a ton of arrows. And if you combine this with something like the lightning quiver, void quiver, firework arrow, something like that, then shooting 5 firework arrows in each direction actually goes pretty dang crazy. And so for that, this is definitely an S tier enchantment, especially if you're using it on the right type of bow like I am. This enchantment is just insane. Next is the committed enchantment, and I actually got a couple comments on this last video about how it works because I didn't exactly know how it works. So it can do 0 to 100% more damage based on how low the enemy's health is, and I thought that was just like a range, like you can get anywhere between that, but it's actually the lower their health is, the more damage it does, which does, I can't decide if that makes it better or worse, because it's like if they're that low, then do I need it to do more damage? Like they're that low, they're just gonna die anyway. So I don't really know. I still don't really love this enchantment. I feel like it maybe makes that a little bit better. So I'm gonna put it in D tier. I could see how this and Accelerate paired together could actually be pretty good, because Accelerate, you know, it doesn't most of the time do a lot of damage depending on the bow that you have it on. But if you have it combined with Committed, then I could see that going pretty crazy. Next is the Critical Hit enchantment, and this enchantment is definitely S tier. Same with the Sword enchantment. This thing is just crazy, especially if you do pair it with the enchantment like Critical Hit. Like if I were to have Critical Hit on my auto crossbow, that bow shoots so quick, and then if I were to have Critical Hit on it, it would be like Fighter's Bindings with the Death Cap Mushroom and Critical Hit. Like, that enchantment would be activating so much that I'd actually go pretty crazy. So yeah, S tier. Next is the Cooldown Shot enchantment, and this one's actually quite interesting, and I can't decide how useful it is, because if you attack an enemy with a fully charged shot, it reduces the time on your artifact, so it can reduce it by up to 1.5 seconds, which is pretty good. Like if you have a firework arrow, something that takes a really long time, and you keep attacking enemies with a fully charged shot, then it could drop it down quite a bit. But on the other hand, I don't know. I really am stuck about this enchantment. I don't really know where to place it, especially because I haven't used it a lot. I am thinking though that it's an A tier enchantment, because if you do have something like a firework arrow where it has a really long cooldown, then having something that could reduce that cooldown 1.5 seconds every time you attack could be pretty good. Up next is the Dynamo enchantment, and yet again, this is an F tier enchantment. It used to be pretty good. It used to be really good actually. But now they nerfed it so much, you have to roll 20 times to fully charge it. It just doesn't do enough damage to be worth it in my opinion. I guess maybe it would be good if you paired it with the burst string bow, because then you'd be rolling and doing damage, but I don't know. In my opinion, still not great, F tier. Up next is the Dipping Poison enchantment, and this one's actually quite good. If you use a health potion, then you can get to up to 12 arrows that are covered in poison, so they do a little bit more damage, a little bit of lingering damage, which is quite helpful. Especially if you pair it with something like Infinity, because then you can get some of those arrows back. Just because the fact that it gives you arrows, which can sometimes be hard to find, I'd say this is an A tier enchantment, because not only does it do extra damage, but also gives you free arrows, which is just like a huge plus. Next is the Enigma Resonator, and yet again, this is probably going to be S tier, because it's basically just a critical hit, but more soul focused. So if you're trying to do a soul build, then this is definitely a pretty good option. Next is Fire Aspect, and yet again, this is going to be an A tier enchantment, just because I love getting that extra damage, that little bit of lingering damage, because maybe you shoot them, mob's super low, but then Fire Aspect just takes care of it for you and they die. I love it. Good enchantment. Up next is the Fuse Shot enchantment, and this one I actually think is quite good, because it deals up to 100% damage to mobs. So basically, if it's maxed here, then every third shot becomes basically like a little bomb arrow. So it'll shoot out, explode, and damage mobs around it, which is quite good. And so I put this in A tier, especially if you do pair it with something like Accelerate, where you can shoot really, really quick, because then you're getting to that every third shot really quick. If you have a slower firing bow, then maybe I wouldn't recommend this enchantment as much, because you know you're not going to be getting to that third shot as quick. But if you have a bow that shoots quick, then this is definitely a win. Up next is the Gravity enchantment, and unlike the sword, I actually do think that this is probably another A tier enchantment, because it pulls in mobs to where you shoot. So if you shoot a mob, it's going to pull in other mobs to that mob, which is actually quite helpful, especially if you do pair it with something like the Fuse Shot, because then that explosive damage is going to be exploding all the other mobs around that mob that gets pulled in. And it's actually a bow called the Imploding Crossbow that basically does that exact same thing. You don't need enchantments, and it's quite good. Next is the Growing Enchantment, and this is probably going to be C or D tier because in the air it grows and it can do up to 75% more damage, which first of all isn't even that much damage. Second of all, the mob needs to be far away because in the air it grows, so they have to be kind of far away for them to be able to get that peak maximum growth for it to do the most damage. Also, it doesn't work if you have the enchantment multi-shot or a bow that shoots multiple arrows. It's only going to affect like the main arrows it shoots. It's not that good. Honestly, it's probably going to be D tier. It doesn't even do that much damage, and they have to be far away, which I guess for a bow is alright, but sometimes you need it to do close. Up next is the Infinity Enchantment, and this is definitely a strong S tier. This enchantment is insane. So if you have a bow that shoots super quick, then I'd say that this enchantment is a must. Otherwise, you're going to be running out of arrows like crazy, and this will save you so many arrows. It also works with quivers, like the Firework Quiver or the Thundering Quiver. You're going to get arrows back from that. So sometimes you can shoot a firework arrow sometimes 2 or 3 times in a row. So this enchantment is definitely insane. Next is the multi-shot enchantment, and yet again, I feel like this is just another enchantment I can show you because if you do it right, then this enchantment is insane. So here's my harp crossbow. Once again, it has the multi-shot enchantment, and it grants the chance to fire 5 arrows at once. 40% chance. You may not think that's super high, but the harp crossbow already shoots 5 arrows. And as far as I know, this chance to trigger and chance to shoot 5 arrows happens those 5 times. So as you can see, it can shoot just a swarm of arrows if you get super lucky. And if you pair this with something like the Thundering Quiver and a Firework Arrow, you can get huge explosions, which are just insane. And this just wipes out mobs, especially when I have Chain React. I mean, look, it's shooting multiple arrows in different directions as well. This enchantment is just, it's insane. Definitely a strong S tier. Up next is the Levitation Shot enchantment, and to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this one. It's probably going to be a B tier because after you roll and shoot a mob, it's going to make them levitate and take up to 300% damage, which is like critical hit or the Enigma Resonator or whatever this one's called, because it's going to be triple your damage, which is actually quite good. The problem for me is after rolling, because if you only have armor that lets you roll once, doesn't give you any bonus rolls, then you're going to be slower after rolling. You're only going to be able to affect one mob at a time instead of being able to take care of groups, which is what I look for when I'm using a bow. So I want to be able to use it as a crowd control thing. So personally, not a huge fan, but it does still do pretty good damage. Next is the Overcharge enchantment. I'd say that this is definitely an S tier enchantment and a must have if you have a single shot bow that you're pulling back to do maximum amount of damage, because you can continue pulling back your bow to up to quadruple your damage of your fully charged bow, which can do some pretty insane numbers. So I definitely put this at S tier. If you are using one of those single shot bows, then I'd say this is quite good. I would maybe move it down to A tier because the time to keep pulling it back, I wouldn't say is great because you're not going to be able to take down a lot of mobs. But for like a boss fight or something, or a little bit stronger mobs, then I would say that this enchantment is pretty crazy. Next is the Piercing enchantment, and this enchantment I'm actually quite interested in because if you max it out, then every arrow you shoot will go through the mob that you shoot it at and past, so it can hit like the next mob. And it still does damage to that first mob. It does the damage of whatever it would normally do if it just stuck and it went away. And I feel like this enchantment would be quite crazy if you had it on something like the harp crossbow that just shoots tons of arrows, because I'm pretty sure this enchantment will affect all of those arrows. So it's something that I want to play around with more because I feel like that would be crazy if I could get a bow with that, but I haven't been able to get one with that yet. So for now, it's going to be in B tier until I can confirm and test that it would happen like that on the harp crossbow. I'm pretty sure it will. But until then, it's going to be in B tier because it's still a pretty solid enchantment. But I feel like it could move up for sure. But for right now, I'm putting it in B. Next is the Poison Cloud enchantment, and I'd say this is a pretty mid-tier enchantment because It just creates a little poison cloud, does a little bit of extra damage. I just never use this enchantment, and I don't see much reason to use it. Up next is the Power Enchantment, and I think this is going to be an S tier enchantment because it's basically the same as Sharpness, but for a bow. It just increases the damage of the bow. So if you just need some good solid damage increase, then this is the way to do it. Next is the Prospector enchantment, and it's going into D tier for basically all the same reasons that I listed in the last video. It's just not very helpful. Up next is the Punch enchantment. And to be honest, I don't think this enchantment is super useful, but I do think it's super fun because it can knock back mobs, and if you get it on something like the Doom crossbow, which has it, at least I think it's the Doom crossbow, it has it by default, it's its unique enchantment. If you can get it again, then it just shoots mobs flying, especially if you can one-shot them, it just sends them off the map so quick. It's so funny. If I wanted to go through the work, I'd find the clip, but to be honest, I'm too lazy. And you can just experience it for yourself. So this is going to be a strong B tier enchantment, not because it's super helpful, but because it's just super funny. Next is the Radiance shot enchantment, and this has got to be by far the worst enchantment in the game because sure, it's Radiance, that sounds pretty good, it's super good on melee weapons, but the thing is with melee weapons, you're close to the mob. The thing is with bows, at least when I'm using them, I'm not hugging the mob. And with bows, the Radiance shot, it activates to the mob that you're shooting. So if you're shooting a zombie from like super far away, the Radiance is gonna be like the area around the zombie, not around you. So unless you're hugging the zombie, the Radiance shot isn't gonna do anything for you. So that's why this is going to be a strong F tier enchantment, maybe even lower if it could go lower, because it's just so useless, because unless you're hugging the mob, it's not even going to take into effect. So it's like, why waste the slot for such a useless enchantment? And I could maybe see how if you're playing with other people, this enchantment could be slightly better, because maybe your friend is attacking the mob and then you shoot it with the bow and it does Radiance and then they get healed. But it's just not a good use case even then, and where I and other people never play with anyone else, it just makes it not useful. Up next is the Rapid Fire enchantment, and this is very similar to the Accelerate enchantment. The thing with the Accelerate enchantment is it has to be in a row, so if you stop shooting, then the Accelerate enchantment Accelerate enchantment will eventually go away. But with Rapid Fire, it's just a consistent thing the whole time, no matter if you stop or whatever. And fully maxed out, it's going to let you attack 20% quicker, which is a good amount quicker. I don't think it's quite on the same tier as Accelerate because it's not going to let you shoot as quick, so it's going to be one tier lower. But I would be interested to see a combo with Accelerate and Rapid Fire, because I think being able to shoot that fast would actually be kind of insane, and I want to see it. Next is the Refreshment enchantment, and this enchantment lets you, after you defeat a mob, will let you up to, I think it was 3 seconds, lower your cooldown potion time, which is pretty good, especially if you can defeat a whole horde of mobs. Then I think it would stack. I'm not 100% sure on that, I haven't really tested it. So for that reason, it's going to C tier. It would be higher, but since, to be honest, I don't really know how it works and I never use it, I think that justifies it being in C tier. But if it would be, like if I were to put it on my harp crossbow and take out a whole group of mobs and it would just bring back my health potion instantly, then it'd definitely be way higher on the list. But for some reason, I don't feel like Minecraft Dungeons would let it work that way. Next is the Ricochet enchantment, and I'd say that this is probably in B or A tier because it lets you, I believe, up to a 60% chance of your arrow to ricochet off of the enemy and like just go, I don't know if it targets the next enemy or if it's just in like a random direction, but I was testing it a little bit and it does seem to work if you have like a firework arrow or a thundering quiver arrow equipped, and it will still, like at least with the Thundering Quiver, it'll still affect the first mob that you hit and then go on to the next, which would be pretty crazy, especially if you have it on something like a harp crossbow where it shoots bunches of arrows. And I could see how this one would be quite insane, and I want to test it more, but for now it's going to be on the same tier as Piercing for kind of the same reasons, just because I haven't tested it a lot. But if it does work like I think it does, where if you shoot a bunch of arrows at once, they can all ricochet off, then it would definitely be A tier, but since I'm not quite sure, it's going to be in B tier. But just know that it's kind of in a limbo right now. Up next is the Roll Charge enchantment, and I don't know how to feel about this one because yet again it's another rolling enchantment, which I really don't like. But after you roll with this one, it makes all your ranged attacks fully charged and it lasts for up to 3 seconds. So I'm just, thinking in my brain here. If you were to have a bow that had like power or something where it has to be fully charged to do more damage, and then you put something like rapid fire on it, maybe even accelerate that lets you shoot a lot quicker, then I could see how this enchantment would be actually really good because, if you combo those together, you roll and then you just rapid fire as many arrows you can, they'll all be fully charged. Then I could see how this would be quite good. I don't know, I can't decide to put it in C tier or B tier because I don't think it's like that amazing, but at the same time I could see the use case where it could be really good. I think it's going to end up in C tier, just kind of middle of the road, because if you don't use it right, I guess that's with any enchantment. Ah man, I'm so torn. Okay, just know that this one's ending up in C tier, but I don't know how to feel about this one. Up next is the Shock Web enchantment, and I don't think this one's super good, but I do think it's super fun, because basically if you have a fully charged arrow, you can shoot it, and then it attaches like a little anchor point to it, and then if you shoot another arrow, it'll attach an anchor point to it, and then it creates like a chain of lightning to those 2 anchor points, so you can kind of like set up a barrier if you shoot 2 walls, or if you shoot 2 mobs, then they can like chain arc to each other and keep doing damage, which is actually quite good. So I'd say this is probably a B or even an A tier because it doesn't do like insane amounts of damage, but if you do shoot 2 mobs and you can have like up to 3 webs, I think. Yeah, you can have up to 3 beams. So if you shoot like 3 different mobs, they'll all arc together, do bunches of damage, which is actually quite good in my opinion. Next is the Smite enchantment, and once again it's going to be D tier. It's just not super helpful. It only targets undead mobs, which is like zombies, skeletons, stuff like that, and personally I'd rather save my enchantment slot for something like critical hit or chain reaction where it will affect everything I shoot and not just the undead. Up next is the Supercharge enchantment, and this enchantment, if you have a fully charged back bow, it does more damage and pushback up to I believe 40%, which is actually pretty good, and it kind of makes me want to put the roll charge quicker because if you have both of these comboed, then I could see how that would be really good because then you just roll once, you can shoot up to, or you have 3 seconds to shoot just fully charged arrows, and if these combo together, then that'd be really good. So I'm going to put this in B tier, and I think I'm going to move roll charge up because with those 2 comboed together, you're going to be doing more damage, more knockback, and all of your arrows will be fully charged and doing more damage, more knockback. That could be pretty insane and maybe even worthy of A tier. Next is the Tempo Theft enchantment, and this is good for speedrunning, but not really anything else because it just steals a portion of the mob's speed for up to 50%, so it'll just make you run a little bit quicker. And then I'm going to put it in D tier because unless you're speedrunning, this enchantment is just not going to be very useful. Up next is the Enchanting enchantment, and yet again, this is a really good enchantment. It does extra damage to enchanted mobs, and I'm going to put it into A tier because it's really only good in the late game when more mobs are enchanted. I can't remember what I put it on the melee tier list. I think I put it in S, but I feel like it's a little bit less helpful with the bow because there are, I feel like, maybe a little bit better enchantments to have. And like I said, it's a lot better in late game, so in early games, enchantment's not going to be as good. Next is the Void Strike enchantment, and this is definitely going to be an S tier enchantment because like with melee weapons, Void Strike is just absolutely crazy, and this is going to be every arrow is going to have Void Strike, which is pretty insane because Void Strike makes you do so much more damage, and if every arrow has Void Strike on it, then yeah, that's pretty crazy. Next is the Exploding enchantment, and yet again, I'm not a huge fan of this enchantment. I don't think it's super good, doesn't do lots of damage. It can be kind of good, but where with bows you already have different things that can explode, I don't see why you need enchantment that would make the mobs' bodies explode. I don't really see why you need an extra exploding enchantment, but still alright, so it's going in C tier. Up next is the Weakening enchantment, and before I put this in F tier with melee weapons, but someone did make a pretty good point where if you don't have armor with damage reduction, this enchantment could be quite helpful because it reduces the damage that mobs can do to you. So for that, I won't put it in F, but I am still going to put it in D because I still don't think it's very good. I'd much rather have really any B to S enchantment instead of weakening, because I don't think it's very helpful. Next is the looting enchantment, and yet again, I don't think this enchantment's very good. It just gives you an increased chance to drop consumables. I'm tempted to put it in F. I think I put it in D tier last time with the melee, but I think it's gonna be an F tier because, yet again, there are so many other enchantments that I'd rather have that I just see myself never really ever using this enchantment. And finally, we have the Wild Rage enchantment. And I don't really know how to feel about this enchantment because it has a 40% chance, if maxed out, to send a mob into a Wild Rage, which makes it hostile towards everyone, so it can attack other mobs. But notice how it still says everyone, which means it can still attack you, which, you know, doesn't really help that much. I guess it's alright that it can attack other mobs, but it's not super helpful, so I think it's going to be a D tier. But there you go, I've now ranked every enchantment in Minecraft Dungeons, and I think I'm pretty happy with this list. I think there's maybe a few I could move around if you were to combo it right, then I could see how it could be higher. But overall, I think I am quite happy with how this list turned out. I think besides those few things, there's not really much I would change. But sadly, that will have to do it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you are new, I'd appreciate if you subscribed. If you liked and liked the video, new videos every Thursday. And remember to stay jolly.